right, good afternoon and welcome. Hello. We're waiting for a few others to join us. Welcome to our second housing seminar, and in this hour, we hope that you learn how to create a rental unit. I want to thank you for taking the time to join us today. My name is Amber Harrison. I'm the Housing Innovation Manager at York Community Service Association and also the local health officer for the town of York. This housing seminar is the second one that we're hosting. There'll be a couple more coming, and I'll announce that at the end. It's brought to you by a joint grant received from the Maine Housing Organization by York Community Service Association. I think Michelle Sertival, if you could raise your hand, Executive Director of YCSA, and with Fairtide and Kittery, I believe Emily Flinkstrom is there, Executive Director, raise your hand, thank you. So together, this grant helped supported the Navigator Pilot Program, and it's a 2-year project established by the legislature through LD 1733. The navigators for this program work with families experiencing or at risk of homelessness in obtaining housing and assisting them in maintaining stable housing following lease up. The 3 major components of the Housing Navigator Pilot Program are landlord engagement, pre-tenancy assistance to families, and housing stability services. Today, we hope to be able to cover the types of rentals you can create, the steps to get you there, the tools and terms to be able to talk confidently with your code officers, your builders, your realtors, your tenants, and hopefully become a landlord to help alleviate the housing crisis we are currently facing. You can see from YCSA's webpage there that is being shared with you. There are numerous things that through the Housing Navigator program we assist with, including landlord incentives that are listed there. And at the bottom of the page, you'll be able to find a way to connect with myself or Emily or connect with me to have a consultation on how to create a rental unit on your property, or if you're looking at purchasing a property, we can discuss the various means of getting permitting, construction, and occupancy completed. And to make sure we're helping you best we can today on how to create that rental unit, we've collected your questions at registration. We're hoping through sharing them with our speakers today that they'll be able to answer them as best they can. You can also, again, schedule a consultation with myself to go over those questions or specific properties. This webinar will be available on the library's YouTube channel, as well as YCSA's Housing Solutions Library. That is on YCSA's webpage. And again, we will also have it restreamed on the public access channel for the towns of York and Kittery. There at the bottom, you can see that we had our last webinar last month on an introduction to the housing crisis. And I invite you to take a look at that very informative webinar that we hosted. So to get started, I want to introduce our speakers. We have 3 today. Our first speaker is Jason Garnham. He's the Director of Planning and Development for the town of Kittery. Hey, Jason. Previously in Saco, he brings more than 15 years of experience in the construction industry, specifically in planning and community development content. He's going to be touching on how zoning affects our ability to create these rental units, specifically what Kittery and Southern Maine is offering for zoning and legislation that might be coming through that would help alleviate some of the hurdles that you may be facing in creating those ADUs or rental units. Our second speaker is Heather Ross. She is an assistant code enforcement officer in York, previously in Elliott and Kittery. She brings almost 25 years of the code enforcement, land use, and planning experience in Southern Maine. She's certified in all the current and applicable building codes, local ordinances, and regularly assists from first initial meeting through permitting, construction, and occupancy on rental units in town, specifically in accessory dwelling units. Heather will touch on the types of rentals you can create and the process for applying for that approval, again, from construction all the way through to occupancy. Our third speaker is Troy Williams. He's a Maine and New Hampshire licensed realtor with Keller Williams Realty. Hey, Troy. He brings over 10 years of experience as a realtor in Southern Maine, and since 2012, he's been the #1 broker in the Yorks. His professional experience in creating units, as well as personal experience in creating these rental units, and he'll be talking about what to look for on these properties, what to consider, and maybe some stumbling blocks that you might come across. So our speakers today are going to show you how to create these rental units in Southern Maine, what steps to take, what to expect in that process, and how to make it easier for you so you could be more confident as a landlord and hopefully create some units that will help to alleviate the housing crisis, one unit at a time. So I'd like to start with our speaker, Jason Garnham. Welcome, Jason.
There we go. Okay, I've been unmuted. Thank you, Amber, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jason Garnham. I'm the Director of Planning and Development for the town of Kittery. I've been here in Kittery for a little over 6 months and in Maine for just about 2 years. And prior to that, I was a planning professional in Western Washington State. I was asked to talk a little bit about LD 2003, a recent piece of statute that the Maine legislature passed and was signed into law by the governor, and to talk about how that interacts with some of the other state planning and land use regulations, and then also to specifically talking about how we're promoting or permitting ADUs here in Kittery. Thank you. Next slide. I prepared some slides. They're not fancy, too many words on them, I know, but we all know that talking about legislation can be kind of dry and confusing. So I thought it would be helpful to have some bullet points for you to refer to. So I wanted to start by talking about LD 2003. This is a bill that was passed by the Maine legislature last year, signed into law by the governor in April 2022. The rules in LD 2003 were supposed to take effect this month. However, implementation was delayed by a separate law, that's LD 1706. And the date at which those rules take effect varies depending on what type of decision-making body you have in your municipality. So if you live in a town that has a council representative form of government, then LD 2003 rules will take effect January 1 of next year. And if you live in a municipality where, excuse me, you devise rules by town meeting, those rules will take effect July 1 of 2024. One thing to note right off the bat is that LD 2003 does not override shoreland regulations in the state of Maine at this time. So I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But for the purpose of this webinar, the LD 2003 really has three separate components that are intended to increase housing opportunities in Maine, as the title of the bill contains. But what I'm going to talk about right now is the accessory dwelling units provisions. And what LD 2003 really does is it makes it so that ADUs are to be allowed on basically any single family zoned lot, any property that's zoned for residential development and has or will have a legal single family dwelling will be allowed to have an ADU. Your local municipality after those dates cannot prohibit them in those areas. So that represents for some communities a big change. And may very well be what tips the scale toward property owners such as perhaps some of yourselves constructing some of these units. As far as what is an ADU, accessory dwelling unit, I didn't intend to do a lot of a descriptive explanation of that. But it is important to know that it's secondary to the primary residence, And according to the law, that accessory unit can be built within an existing residence. It can be attached to a principal residence, or it can be in an entirely separate structure. And basically, as long as it meets the rules for building codes, health and safety codes, and building setbacks and lot coverage limits that would be in your local zoning provisions. Again, the state law makes it so that your local permitting body would have to approve them. Now you're going to see this on all of my 5 or 6 slides that I made. If you're a person who's interested in building an ADU on your lot, I strongly advise you to contact your local code enforcement or planning office before you start a project. I can virtually guarantee that the staff in your town are aware of the provisions of LD 2003. And they're probably diligently working on the code amendments that are needed in order for your municipality to remain in compliance with those laws, and they will be able to help you understand whether and how you can build an ADU at your property before and after those laws take effect. Next slide, please. So for those of you who maybe own a little more land, or think that ADU provisions in your local ordinance are a little too restrictive, a lot of ADU regulations have size limits. Perhaps you want to build a second unit, so that a larger family can live on your property, or so on. For those of you who are in that situation, LD 2003 also has provisions that are geared more toward residential development in general. And there's a lot of nuance to this that is based primarily on whether your property is served by public sewer and water utilities. But the gist of it is that if your property is large enough, up to 4 dwelling units are to be allowed on any parcel where housing is allowed by zoning within your community. So this in some ways represents an even bigger change for the state of Maine. Again, this is to be applied statewide, and I'm sure the planning and code enforcement officials in your towns are grappling with exactly how to incorporate this into your zoning ordinances. Again, if your property is larger and you're interested in building a duplex or a triplex, you may be able to do that after this law takes effect. It is important, just as with the ADUs, your underlying local zoning provisions for unit density, that's how many residences per acre you can have, your zoning setbacks, your dimensional standards, things like height limits, footprint maximums in some cases, and your building code requirements, fire, health, life safety, septic, and so on. All those requirements will still apply. We won't have people out there willy-nilly building duplexes and triplexes that don't connect to sewer facilities and so on. So one of the reasons I made some slides was so that you all, if you wanted to look back at this or take a screenshot, if you want to have more information, if you enjoy reading, state statute, here are the links to some of the resources that might help you learn more about LD 2003. Next slide, please. So I mentioned shoreland zoning. This was a question that I believe was brought up by one or more of you attendees. How does the state ADU and residential housing provisions, how do those impact properties that are in shoreland areas? Now, for those of you who are not familiar with this, the Maine legislature passed the Maine Mandatory Shoreland Zoning Act in 1971, and that basically created a required zoning, we call it an overlay, it mandated zoning rules that apply to all areas that are within a certain distance of certain types of water bodies. And you can see it's 250 feet within coastal shorelines, 250 feet of certain rivers, ponds, and large wetlands, and then within 75 feet of certain streams. Certainly here in Kittery, we have a lot of coastal shoreline, shoreland zoning areas. So it's important to note that LD 2003 expressly does not override shoreland zoning. So, you know, if you're a Kittery resident and you were hoping to build an ADU as part of your, you know, existing property near the waterfront, that still may not be allowed, even though LD 2003 makes those legal everywhere else. So again, as with my advice earlier, if you are interested in doing something, I can't tell you this often enough, contact your local code enforcement or planning office so that they can help you understand what you can and can't do and how burdensome the process is going to be in order for you to be able to do it. Next slide, please. So I was also asked to talk about ADUs in Kittery. Kittery is an interesting case in part because the town adopted an ADU ordinance essentially ahead of schedule prior to LD 2003, in which this type of housing is currently allowed in all residential zoning districts in Kittery, again, except within those shoreland areas. Kittery does have some limitations on those rules. Property owners are currently limited to one ADU on a lot, and you can only construct an ADU on a Kittery residential property that has one single family residence on it. So in Kittery, you cannot build an ADU on a property with a duplex or, you know, a triplex or something. State law would allow that. The LD 2003 does allow your local municipality to devise rules that are more flexible and that allow more housing. But in Kittery, these are the rules that are in effect today. So one of the things that I've heard from the many people I've spoken with over the years who are interested in building an ADU, they often want them to be, you know, a certain size. Here in Kittery, the maximum size is 1,000 square feet, and the ADU cannot contain more than 2 bedrooms. So again, if you were hoping to build something more like a modern house as an ADU, it would be those provisions that allow duplexes and triplexes that you would be looking for rather than an ADU. A couple other considerations, interesting things that Kittery is doing. This is really unique for a town of Kittery's size. Kittery devised an ADU grant program, and that grant program provides grants of $50,000 to property owners who want to construct an ADU and who meet certain income requirements. That program was administered last year, and we had four applicants qualify. So far, only one of them have actually constructed an ADU, but it's something that Kittery has a housing committee. It's something that the housing committee and various stakeholders within the community are talking about, essentially trying again or running again into the future. So that the money that finances this grant program comes from sale of town properties. So, you know, properties that are often acquired by the town through foreclosures. They go into an account, and we use those funds to develop all kinds of affordable housing, but part of that is for the ADU grant program. Another thing I wanted to mention before I conclude my part of your webinar is, you know, some of you may be considering constructing an ADU to use it for short-term rentals. That this is yet another one of those things where you definitely want to contact your local code enforcement or planning office before you start a project. Here in Kittery, the town does administer a short-term rental licensing program, and essentially, if the property is owner occupied, there's no real limit on how many short-term rental licenses we'll issue for folks who live in their properties and just want to be able to rent it, you know, for when you go on vacation and things like that for a little extra income. Or if you have an ADU in your basement or backyard or whatever, and you'd rather, you know, rent it through Airbnb than have a year-round tenant because you like to use it part of the year for your family to visit and whatnot. Kittery is very kind of lenient on those situations where the property owner lives on the premises and wants to do those things. But if you do not own and live on the property, then Kittery has a quota system where we're only willing to issue a certain number of permits every year for that. So again, I included a reference here. If you really enjoy reading local ordinance, local zoning codes, the detailed provisions for accessory dwelling units here in the town of Kittery can be found by clicking on the link below. That concludes my presentation. I don't know if we're taking questions now or if we'll wait to the end, but I'll hand it back over to our host.
Thank you, Jason. And as a note, I will have a copy of his presentation on YCSA's Housing Solutions Library, as well as those links and his contact information. Anyone can reach out. And I think it's a great reminder at the bottom of all those slides to reach out to your local code office and planning departments for these projects. Very exciting what Kittery is doing. And your town manager, Kendra, was gracious enough like you to join us last month and discuss some of these initiatives in Kittery. Particularly excited about the Housing Reserve Fund, and hopefully something like that can be done here in York, similar to what you've been able to accomplish. And thank you, Jason, for your time. Appreciate that. Next, we're going to move over to Heather Ross, a code enforcement officer, who will hopefully be able to answer some of the questions that you've submitted, as well as show how Kittery and York are similar, maybe just similar in some of those things that Jason just talked about with regards to ADUs and the types of rental units. So welcome, Heather. Thank you.
Thank you. So I have been doing code enforcement for over 20 years, initially in Kittery, then Elliott and York. So I'm familiar with a lot of the local ADU ordinances. Just initially, they are allowed in most of the communities. And for those of you kind of looking to see what an ADU is, it can be in York, specifically part of an existing home or part of a newly constructed accessory dwelling unit or an existing dwelling unit. If it is in something that's newly constructed or existing, it does have to meet setbacks for that particular zone in its current state. And it also has to be within 150 feet of the primary dwelling unit. The ADU does need to be rented on a yearly basis in York. So we don't allow short-term rentals for that. It does need to be a lease agreement on a yearly basis. And one of the units needs to be owner occupied. That can be either the existing primary structure, or that could be the accessory dwelling unit. So you have, more of a couple that's aging, looking for something a little bit smaller. They could construct an ADU on their property and rent out their house. So that way they could, encourage housing for larger families in the particular area. No seasonal rental, no Airbnb or short-term. Structures that are within the shoreland zone do have some additional restrictions. So I would encourage you to discuss those first. In other areas of town that are outside of shoreland, there are no minimum lot size requirements for that, so long as the principal structure on there is a residential structure. Total gross floor area of an ADU is a bit smaller in York. We are looking at perhaps changing that with some zoning amendments coming through. And I would encourage you to get involved with the planning department and the planning board meetings if that's something that interests you. Right now, we're capped at 750 square feet internal living space, or no more than 50% of the gross floor area of an existing dwelling. So if you had a smaller dwelling, it would limit, or could definitely limit the size of what it is that you'd be looking to do for an accessory dwelling unit. How that's measured is a little bit different too. It's internal dimensions. It does not include attic space, so long as that there's no electricity up there other than for like a smoke detector, no finished walls or flooring. So you could construct something that's of a cape type unit that's unfinished on the second floor and unfinished on the basement, or attach a garage. That does not need to be included in that count, nor do decks or areas that aren't conditioned. So, you know, any property that's sold or transferred. So if you complete this and you decide you want to sell it, whoever purchases it does have to maintain the same. So they do have to own or occupy one of those units. And there is a accessory dwelling unit covenant that needs to be filed with the town prior to occupancy. It is something that we already have a copy of here. It's very simple. It just says, these are the requirements of the ordinance, and I agree that I'm going to continue to meet them. Just, you know, it needs to be something that's designed to meet that same kind of architectural style, the same kind of existing facade. Maybe you do something like a carriage house, or that, you know, looks like a garage that's going to match the house with an apartment above it. You do have to provide one off-street parking for each unit or for each bedroom in the home. As far as, you know, starting on the process, I would encourage, just as Jason did, contact us. We are more than happy to sit down with you to go over the rules, the regulations, you know, what might apply to your particular property, you know, different things like where you might be able to locate it, you know, how you might be able to make that work. There are, if you're in town water and sewer, there are requirements to have sign-offs from those departments as part of the building permit application. So, you know, before you reach out to the contractor, you get that far, just, you know, set up an appointment with us, sit down, we'll go through it all, you know, and then you can move from there once you've decided what it is that you'd like to do. And, you know, as far as the permitting itself, it's a permit application. You would need structural drawings if you were constructing something new. The state does have a international residential code. Those items would need to be met as far as how it's constructed in the floor plan showing the layout. Anything else you can think of, Amber?
Thank you, Heather. Yeah, one of the other things I noted as you were talking about the differences between York and Kittery, certainly the size. Kittery allows 1,000 square foot, York allows 750 square foot. But I didn't hear this from Jason, but I know York, as you mentioned, has a covenant, a deed restriction, and the intent of those ADUs in York is really to bolster our year-round residents to have a permanent source of income. And so we are not, York is not endorsing those ADUs necessarily as, like you said, as Airbnbs or short-term rental, but you do need a covenant, which is, as you said, already drawn up by the town. So that paperwork part is already done for them. They would just need to have it signed off. Is that the correct process at the end there?
Correct. Yes. So it would just need to be signed off and filed with the Registry of Deeds, which is right in Alfred, prior to getting occupancy on the unit.
Okay. And then could you speak a little bit about accessory residential units? And I know that is something particular to York zoning ordinance that may allow some folks to apply for an ADU to care for somebody. And it may be that they were denied to have an accessory dwelling unit because of the shoreland zone area, but maybe they could apply under an ARU, which is something very specific to York.
So an ARU is more designed if you have somebody with disabilities that you're going to be taking care of, an aging family member. It is allowed to be designed in that you can have no more than 2 people that occupy that space. It may be something that you're looking at too if you're aging and looking to have a caregiver live in kind of situation. They are still limited to no more than 50% of the gross floor area of the unit or 750 square feet, whichever is more restrictive. You do have to go through the Board of Appeals for approval on that. We don't have them happen very often, but I don't believe that it's ever been anything that's, you know, really a difficult issue to bring before the Board of Appeals. It's just that's the process for it. So you would be able to utilize that for as long as you needed to for care for a particular person. Good.
There we go.
There we go.
Unmuting, sorry. So ARUs are an option for folks, whether you have someone to take care of or you would like a caregiver to live with you, as Heather explained. They don't happen very often. They are really meant for family members to care for others or a caregiver to move in, but it is an option if you're looking to age in place or take care of a family member or someone with disability. And that is a process that goes through the Board of Appeals. And as I mentioned earlier, I am available for consultations also to discuss these things and to assist with that process. Heather, the other thing that I was just thinking as we were talking about the zoning ordinance and how York was a little bit ahead of the curve with accessory dwelling units in that we've had it for a while, and the new LD that's being proposed or has been approved, but in York, like Kittery, won't go into effect until July 1st of 2024, correct? Could you speak a little bit about the process? Someone saying, I'm thinking about, I have a property with a basement or space above the garage. What is the very first thing you would say? Should they be contacting, going through a list of builders, or maybe collecting their evidence or their due diligence parts? And then what do they bring to those meetings with a code officer?
Initially you don't need to have a lot of documentation to bring in. We have the ability to bring up property maps on our computers. We have the ability to pull your files, see if there's any past information there, floor plans that might be able to help you figure out what the living space could be potentially for that area. And we can walk you through the process. You can do that without spending any money initially. And we're always open to discussing that. We could take a look at what those areas are. Cat in the background. And just walk you through it. We could go through section by section, and let you know if this is something we think is going to be feasible, what your next steps would be. If you're on a septic, you might have to contact a soil scientist. We have lists of those in the office. We can provide you with that information. And just, in thinking about it too, it's a great long-term option. Like Amber said, if you're looking at aging in place and you're creating a accessory dwelling unit, something that's going to bring in income, once you're past that point of paying off whatever you've invested to put that unit in, you've got a regular source of income that will carry you through. So, it really makes a great option to do that.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I think one of the things I also found interesting while working in the code office for over 10 years was that all of the construction plans that people submit to code offices are public information. And so you don't need to go online and spend hundreds of dollars on construction plans. You can contact your local code office and get copies of housing plans for free. So I really encourage people, as you're driving around town or talking to neighbors about who they've had built things, get ideas from your neighborhood and addresses, and then go into your local code office and pull those property files and make copies. You don't need to recreate the wheel. We can certainly create units more easily and in a small piece by piece manner rather than large developments. It does help to alleviate the load and retain some of our professionals in the community when they can't find housing. So another way too, as Heather mentioned, is to look them up when you're at the code office. They can pull the GIS maps and do those. Sometimes surveys have been done in the past on properties or abutting properties. So again, calling your code officer, your planners, and finding out what they already have done will save you a lot of time and money. Heather, is there anything else you want to add about the process of creating a rental unit?
Just really encouraging you, yes, to come in and see us in the office and set up times to come in and do that, but also to get involved. If that 750 seems really critical to you for size wise, get involved in that planning process. We've got a few people that will come forward and say it, but unless it's like something that, they've got a group of people that are coming forward and saying, hey, we really need to see this piece of it changed. you don't want it to be something that's overlooked. So, right now where that's opened up and that's being looked at is a prime opportunity to get involved with that. So please.
Thank you. Yes, I echo that sentiment. Speak up if you'd like to see larger sizes on ADUs, attend your planning meetings and your select board meetings. Thank you, Heather. I appreciate that. And again, I will have Heather's contact information on our website as well, so you can reach out to her and through the Town of York's website. Before we go to our final speaker, Troy Williams, I just wanted to read a response that I got from York's tax assessor, Luke Figge, who's been there for several decades. We got some questions about how rental units and ADUs might affect someone's property value. And he wanted to respond that there are 3 approaches to property appraisals: a sales approach, cost approach, and income approach. Appraisers use the sales approach, which looks at comparable sales and makes adjustments to the sales price to account for differences in values of the subject. Cost approach uses a previously known value of the land from similar sales and adds that to the cost of replacing all the improvements minus depreciation. This is the current way York assesses ARUs and ADUs. The income approach looks at how much annual income the property generates and applies a capitalization rate to achieve a value. The income approach is most appropriate for leased areas such as office buildings and commercial storage. Income approach can be used for larger apartment complexes, but is not commonly used for 1 or 2 family houses, even if they are rented. So long story short, the assessment should go up about as much as the structure costs to build. If the ARU ADU is carved out of the existing living space, the assessment may not even change at all. So I want to share that right from Luke Figge, the assessor. And again, his contact information, I'll share it on our website, but you can also reach him through the Town of York website. Very knowledgeable and easy to reach and talk to about these things. But if you are considering building an accessory residential unit, accessory dwelling unit in your existing space, your taxes may not even be affected, which is great to learn. But again, there are 3 different approaches to that assessment. So please speak to your assessor in your community if you're not reading or watching from York today. So now we're going to go to Troy Williams. He is our final speaker today. And again, Troy brings a lot of experience as a realtor and broker in Southern Maine. And a lot of you may already know Troy. Welcome. Thank you for joining us, Troy.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to be talking about this. It's something that I'm a big fan of. I personally have an ADU. I built a house with my parents a few years ago, put one in their new home as well. I think it's a no-brainer, quite honestly. I think everyone should do it. So, I mean, with housing being, very expensive, even more expensive than normal. These last few years, a lot of buyers have been looking at ways to kind of help with those payments, right? I often call these mortgage helpers. They can really be the difference between you being able to comfortably afford that house and not. And you want to own the house. You don't want the house to own you. So with interest rates is high right now, with prices very high. These are top of mind for a lot of people, and I think that's a good thing. One thing a lot of people, and we touched on the size requirements and limits. If you're doing this for rental, not for family necessarily, so with an ADU, not an ARU, that size, isn't as limiting as, so when the Town of York went from 900 square feet to 750 square feet, I don't know, maybe 8 to 9 years ago. I thought that, I was really disappointed in that. I will tell you, it hasn't, there's such a housing shortage and there's such demand. Most people, that 750 square feet can totally work. And a lot of people don't really only need 1 bedroom or 2. Certainly, 2 is plenty. I mean, most people don't have, the family sizes have come down quite a bit. And with this whole tiny house movement thing, and housing being, having to get more creative and have housing in different styles, people now make things so that you can it's much more functional, much more versatile. You can have the bureau in the bed. So you don't need to take up more floor space. You can, I kid you not, I've seen a dishwasher that's also a washer and dryer. Not sure I want to put my utensils in there, but there's a lot of ways to save space. So the one over my garage is only about 400 square feet or so. I have never had any trouble renting that. People love it. So don't let that limit you from doing something. One of the things that when I'm working with buyers who want to do this, that we look for, the low hanging fruit are space over a garage, daylight basements. It's spaces that you can tap into very easily. Don't necessarily need to create more, a new structure, but kind of utilizing a structure that's already there. So you're working with the shell, really easy. As I said, low hanging fruit. If that applies to you, I would certainly look at that as the first way to go. And then if that doesn't work, then go somewhere else. Having a detached garage, that's obviously great. Would rent very well, especially if you included a garage space, but the cost of doing that is more than utilizing space that's already there, just not finished. The next step a lot of people will call me with is people who have bought something and then they want to do it afterwards, but they don't have the funds available to do that. A lot of people immediately think of a home equity loan. With interest rates as high as they are right now, I would actually recommend you don't do a home equity loan. I'd recommend you do a second mortgage. It sounds like semantics, but a second mortgage, you do pay off principal and interest, and you do lock the rate, which is different than a home equity or a HELOC. A HELOC is interest only payments, and the rate is tied to an index. So if rates go up, it goes up automatically. If it goes down, if rates go down, then it goes down. The reason I recommend a second mortgage, though, is you're able to start paying back that principal and interest. You're locking the rate, so you can plan. You can actually have a budget in place and plan for what those payments will be, and make sure that the rent you're going to receive justifies those payments. And then when rates come down, you can refinance that second mortgage just like you can a traditional mortgage, and most likely you'll be able to actually roll that into your first mortgage if rates come down enough. That's what you would want to do, is basically roll it all into your first mortgage. We've got several local banks in this town who will do second mortgages. In 2005 and 2006, second mortgages were very popular, and looking back at the way they were done then, it was not done great. Now it's very different. Again, it's very similar to a first mortgage, a traditional mortgage. It's not taboo. So definitely consider that. I think Heather touched on it. One of the things that one of the stumbling blocks a lot of people run into is septic. So being on septic does limit, or I shouldn't say does, it can limit your ability to do an ADU. Because an ADU is not just an additional bedroom, but it's an additional living space. So you've got a kitchen, you've got laundry, you've got a lot more than just somebody living or another bedroom with somebody there, but it's all of the other things that come with a separate dwelling unit. So the septic does need to be sized for that. One of the ways you can do that is, without having to put in a whole new system, is you can look at, possibly doing a pre-treatment system. There are pre-treatment systems out there that you can connect to your septic system that are a lot more affordable than, a lot easier than having to put in a whole new septic system. And the technology with those is really fascinating. I mean, it's come so far, and it'll actually help your current septic last much longer than it otherwise would. So my parents really didn't like the idea of me putting in an ADU in their house at first. They had owned rental properties in the past, but they never had them attached to their home. And I really pushed for it. And one of the things I said to them was, I said, you can limit how many people are in there. I mean, it's not discriminating if you say, I only one occupant. Now you can't say, only one occupant that looks like this or is this age or whatever else. But you can say, I want one occupant, one person. And that was how I got them, because it was in their daylight basement. And we limited it to one person. It's worked very well. And when you're sharing common walls, a lot of people, that's one thing I hear from a lot of people is like, oh, I want a 2-family, or I want this, I want something that's, more set up for that. You can make modifications. You can do soundproofing in these things. You can limit it to one person. You can put in the lease, these are the quiet hours. As a property owner, you're in a unique position. It's such that, you can set the rules because there's such a demand for housing. You have something that a lot of people need. You don't need to be the solution for everybody. You just need to be the solution for one person. And, I'll tell you, you don't have, rents in York, you can, even if you're below market, the rents here are just insane. You don't need to do vacation rentals in these, some people will say to me, oh, I want to do vacation. What do you mean York doesn't allow short-term rentals and ADUs? I go, you think you want short-term rentals, but you really don't. I mean, you're living there. You don't want people on vacation there. And B, what you can get in rent for, an apartment in New York, it's kind of scary. I mean, it's crazy. You can get a really strong rent, so much so that you don't need to do vacation rentals and deal with all that hassle. So again, don't let that be an issue. You don't do it. I think that's about all I had.
Thank you so much, Troy. I really appreciate the professional and personal insight, particularly with your folks there, and understanding kind of what to look out for and what you're getting into. And particularly the notes about the taking out the second mortgage. And it's an area that we haven't even discussed, and maybe a future webinar might be in line for how to tackle this financially and how to work with banks on how to create these and maybe how to retrofit spaces. There are a lot of legislation with some money potentially trickling down over the next year to assist municipalities as well as property owners to retrofit spaces, particularly those that may have been used for commercial, or now people are working remotely and are not using that space, and we can retrofit that space. And as you said, those low-hanging fruits of the garage or the basement or the attic space, we really need to be looking at how we can alleviate the housing crisis for all. It doesn't need to be a large development. It can be piece by piece on our own properties here in York and these 5 communities that these folks are watching from. So I really want to say thank you to all of our speakers today. And again, all of the information will be shared on YCSA's website on our Housing Solutions Library, as well as reposted on the public access channel. I invite you to reach out to your code enforcement officers, your planners. You're welcome to set up a consultation with myself to go over your properties and what you can do. And just want to say thank you, and to take care as we go about our day and be kind to each other. Thank you very much.